The genesis of the film was the desperation of a fresh-out-of-college writer named Peter Lenkov. He was in L.A. with no leads in how to break into the film industry. There's a barrier that is vital for any creative to cross, to separate from all the others that are also desperate to be in entertainment and actually get in there in order to have the credibility to stay there and to continue to grow. Getting an agent and or recognition is an essential first step, so in desperation, Lenkov wrote film script after film script, 7 in fact. Lenkov liked the film Lethal Weapon and thought he'd like to do a script with cops. He was also interested in the idea of celebrities wanting to freeze themselves when they die, and the urban legend that Walt Disney had actually done so. He decided that rather than another straight action piece that he didn't think would play to his strengths, he'd instead have the cop frozen and then thawed out in the future, where he would battle the worst villain against the backdrop of a society without crime or violence. He got the title Demolition Man because it was the only song his broken tape deck would play. Lenkov's script had the villainous Doucette escaping during his parole hearing after being unfrozen, forcing the authorities to thaw a cop named Wade who'd been arrested on trumped-up charges in order to deal with him. His initial attempt to approach action movie producer Joel Silver was blocked, but eventually he was able to get across his idea of frozen cop, and Demolition Man was finally ready to move on to the next stage of development. However, it was felt that the script needed to be reworked. Among other things, the character of Gallagher, the corrupt mayor, is what the script ends on, with him being in the cryostasis for his crimes and inexplicably being rehab-trained as a janitor out of some bizarre sense of spite. To sort it out, Silver handed the job to Daniel Waters. Waters had worked on the script for Batman Returns, but what was more relevant was that he'd worked on 2 of Silver's other films, The Adventures of Ford Fairlane and Hudson Hawk. Waters felt the script needed a full page-1 rewrite. It was simply a straightforward action piece. For one thing, he felt the film needed to see the brave new world potential of the supposedly idyllic future, and named the female lead after the book's author, Huxley. Other characters had their names revised to fit the new tone. Doucette became Phoenix, and Wade became Spartan. Besides adding satire, drawing inspiration from the Woody Allen classic Sleeper, Waters gave the film subtext. With the brave new world aspects, he was able to give Spartan 2 adversaries instead of 1, perfectly balanced. Simon Phoenix was chaos to the extreme. He does things and he doesn't need a reason. He will kill you just for the momentary joy of killing. Dr. Cocteau is his polar opposite, order to the extreme. He isn't interested in making a perfect society for benevolent reasons. He wants society to be as ordered as an ant colony and as beautiful as a pearl, even if it means those that don't fit his view are cast aside. Spartan is fighting 2 different extremes, one who kills the body, the other who kills the spirit. But Waters looked for ways to make the future different, and most famously called up his colleague Larry Karaszewski, co-writer of Ed Wood and Man on the Moon, to ask about ideas about a future without toilet paper. Karaszewski happened to be on the toilet during their conversation, and looking around the room noticed a bag of seashells, mentioned them, and that was that. The future would not have wads of paper anymore, but 3 seashells to address the situation. The script got an uncredited rewrite by Fred Decker of the Monster Squad. It was he who added material set in 1996 in order to show Phoenix and Spartan in their own time before bringing them to the future. If you don't show Kansas, Oz isn't all that special. The film almost got an additional rewrite once its leading man came in. Lenkov had originally pictured Mickey Rourke for the cop hero, but the part was reportedly going to be for Steven Seagal, with the possibility of Jean-Claude Van Damme playing the villain. As time passed, though, there was interest in giving the project to Sylvester Stallone. Despite him being a big action star, and Joel Silver famous for action films, the 2 had never actually done a project together. They were, however, working on trying to get a sci-fi thriller involving a monster on a transatlantic train named Isobar off the ground together. But that film was having problems. Meanwhile, Stallone famously had a rivalry with Arnold Schwarzenegger as top action star. Back and forth they would go. Who is the manlier man? More muscles, bigger guns, all of that. According to Hollywood legend, which Arnold confirms, although it could be he just likes the story, he'd been getting recognition for his comedy work in Twins and Kindergarten Cop. So he was given a script for another comedy and knew it was dreadful. But for fun, he leaked his interest in the part and made a ridiculous salary demand, knowing that they would likely see if Stallone would take the part for a more reasonable fee, and Stallone would be excited at the chance of swiping one of those juicy parts away from Schwarzenegger. So, Stallone took it, and the result was Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. Coming soon after his comedy flop Oscar, Stallone's career was in trouble. Hence his interest in Isobar, which would satisfy his desire for something that was still in his wheelhouse, while also getting a chance to stretch a bit. His character would not be some heroic figure, but an employee for the train company doing an incognito view of operations on the train, who would have to then step up when everything fell apart. So he initially passed on Demolition Man, but eventually saw it as a chance to perhaps salvage his reputation. He worked on this at about the same time as he was working on Cliffhanger. He also wanted Steven D'Souza to do another pass on the script, but there was an irreconcilable problem between his view of the film and the existing one, that a subplot involving Spartan's daughter be present. Her presence would necessitate a near-future timeline, but such a near future meant, in Hughes' viewpoint, that transformation to the degree seen in the script is unrealistic. It should be much further in the future when Spartan is woken up. Funny enough, the daughter is mentioned, but the subplot doesn't appear in the final film. A consequence of Stallone's recent flops was that his performance stands out amidst the others. They play the film very much as the satire that occasionally borders on parody that was intended. The risk of having his comedy performance fail again, or even worse, that he were to fall into self-parody at such a delicate time in his reputation, made Stallone the most serious performer in the entire film. Seriousness at times that bordered on his work in First Blood in many cases. Everyone else was having fun, but a lot of times he was in there acting like he was in a serious drama. It's not a criticism, but rather an observation about how his performance at times felt out of step with what everyone else was doing. And perhaps no one was having more fun than his co-star, who would bring the demented Simon Phoenix to life. Stallone's first choice for the role of Simon Phoenix was Jackie Chan. This was before Chan's real breakthrough into the North American market. He was pretty much known only for his Hong Kong action films that would be imported on VHS. He was interested in Hollywood, certainly, but he didn't want to play villains right out of the gate, lest he be typecast, so he refused. That's how it then went to the next name on the list, a rising star by the name of Wesley Snipes. Snipes has an amazing talent stack. Yes, he has action bona fides, multiple black belts in fact, but he started out in the Struttin' Street Stuff performing group, which involved dancing and puppets. He was actually on the short list to play Geordie LaForge on Star Trek The Next Generation. He made people laugh in Major League, shiver in New Jack City, and cheer in Passenger 57. He performed on Broadway around the time he appeared in the film Wildcats alongside Woody Harrelson, and the combination of his acting ability and athleticism made him an obvious recommendation by Harrelson when they were casting the street basketball comedy drama White Men Can't Jump. He got the part, but Harrelson was soon possibly going to be replaced by Keanu Reeves. So Snipes intentionally sabotaged the audition when their chemistry was being tested to ensure that Harrelson would get the part. Nothing against Reeves, but he felt a loyalty to Harrelson, who helped get him this part in the first place. You might think that at this point Snipes would consider himself beyond playing a villain like Simon Phoenix. And he did originally turn down the role, but Joel Silver and the director visited him in his trailer on the set of his then current film, the Michael Crichton adaptation Rising Sun. But they really tried to sell him on this part. The fact that he would be the villain actually had nothing to do with his reluctance. Indeed, when he'd first been sent the script for Passenger 57, he assumed he'd be playing the bad guy, not the hero. No, they wanted Snipes as the hero in that film. Well, that was fine for him, but he was playing a number of heroes back to back to back. Playing Simon Phoenix wasn't a step down for Snipes simply because he is a star, thus should be the hero. A lot of times the bad guys get the best parts. Heath Ledger got more accolades than Christian Bale in The Dark Knight, after all. Snipes said, "I don't want to be pigeonholed into just doing the good guys for the rest of my life." Assured that he would have the chance to really play with the role of Simon Phoenix, Snipes took the part. He wanted to be able to move, so they blocked him so he wouldn't have to do too much inactivity. He was given freedom to improvise. With the exception of Boiling Point, his recent films had all been commercial and or critical successes. He didn't have the same pressure that Stallone had. So when Stallone wanted to make changes to their action sequences, to follow patterns in how he felt they should go, Snipes was fine with going along with him on that. No, Snipes' biggest fear when it came to action on set was that he was going to be fighting Stallone. In action scenes, sometimes the blows actually land. It's not intended, but you get so into it and mistakes happen, and in this case, he feared such a mistake might happen. He'd upset Stallone enough to make sure one of his own lands back, and soon it'd be chaos. If Stallone and I get into a fight, and our security gets into a fight, our agents get into a fight, it'd be awful. Snipes' performance as the villain was such a hit that he, if anything, overshadowed Stallone's stoic Spartan. It's reported that it inspired Dennis Rodman of the Chicago Bulls to adopt the dyed hair that would be part of the overall image he'd be known for. And he wasn't the only one with a connection to Chicago sports history that's related to our story. The female lead, Huxley, would be the guide to the 21st century for Spartan, and be corrected by Spartan on her views of the 20th. Originally, that was to be Lori Petty, who was fresh off her role as Kit in the hit baseball film A League of Their Own. What happened is murky. It could be any or all of these things happened. But the first scene of the film with Petty in it was when Huxley brings Spartan to her 20th century decorated apartment. It was the only one they shot together. Some said the studio didn't like the dailies. Petty said she and Stallone got on like oil and water. Others have said that they wanted someone else, and Petty was there as a safety net so that if they couldn't get their first choice, they had someone ready to go. And then once it was confirmed, Petty was shown the door. Regardless of which it is, Petty was immediately replaced by relative newcomer Sandra Bullock. Bullock's small-time prior work, Love Potion No. 9, her Working Girl series, small New York films were a far cry from the big-budget action film she found herself in, suddenly playing opposite of these two huge action stars. Despite initial nervousness about being part of a huge production like that, she wasn't intimidated by the presence of Snipes and Stallone. When the question of the testosterone on a set with two alpha males like that came up, she just coolly responded, "I have plenty of estrogen to counter them. The character is strong, I'm strong, and we're all equal. We're all on equal ground." Another thing to contend with was being the romantic interest of the legendary Sylvester Stallone, but she was all for that. In all the rewrites, they never took out the love scene. You need the love scene. I watch movies to see people get together. The chemistry, the frickin' frack. I love seeing people get together, and film is fantasy. She said Stallone tried to put her at ease, greeting her on her very first day with golf tees up his nose. One thing that helped was that Bullock's background in acting is the Meisner technique. We've previously discussed method acting, which is a very internalized form of acting. It's your experiences that help inform your performance. Meisner is much more external, about reacting with authenticity. You're not in the past. You're incredibly in the present. It makes it much easier to improvise and respond in ways that feel genuine. And given the fluidity of the film, Snipes especially preferred not to focus too much on the precision of the script, but rather on the intent. This training ensured that she was able to bring a performance that wouldn't allow the big names to overshadow her. In every scene, she could hold her own. And not with force, either. like a sort of Tai Chi that can flow with the power of someone else's performance without needing to resist it, but rather to use it. The cheerfulness of her character was a consequence of the seemingly perfect society she lived in, unaware that in actuality they were ruled by someone who wore a velvet glove over an iron fist, who sought order to the point that he would release chaos to try to have it. Americans who've seen the film likely have one of two reactions to the presence of Nigel Hawthorne in the film: no idea who he is, or jaw-dropping shock that he's the one playing the robed dictator. For the former who would like to know the reason for the reaction of the latter, Nigel Hawthorne's defining role is that of civil servant Sir Humphrey Appleby of the comedies Yes, Minister and Yes, Prime Minister. His performance showcased perfect comedic timing, the capacity to say the most incredible non-technobabble, incomprehensible monologues with sincerity, and a way to say the quiet part loud and make it sound reasonable. Hawthorne won 4 BAFTAs for the role and is proud of it. But, as often happens, there was a toll. Despite having previously appeared in Gandhi and the Clint Eastwood techno-thriller Firefox, Hawthorne was in danger of typecasting as a comedy actor. Hawthorne played the lead in the play Shadowlands, the story of C.S. Lewis, as in Narnia, and an American fan, the poet Joy Gresham, that he befriends and marries. Hawthorne won a Tony for the role, and it saved him from an Adam West situation. However, it couldn't overcome the fact that a household name in Britain could be a complete unknown in the U.S. So when a film adaptation of Shadowlands was planned, Hawthorne wasn't even considered for the role. A real slap in the face, considering that, to many, Shadowlands wouldn't have been a hit if it wasn't for the strength of his performance. And yet the role went to Anthony Hopkins, and Hawthorne was forced to watch from the sidelines as the work he'd successfully starred in both London and New York was being given praise without him. Now this is relevant, because another role Hawthorne delighted in was the lead in The Madness of King George III, where he played the Mad King. It was billed as the performance of his life, won him a Laurence Olivier Award, and some said it elevated a middling play to high art. Hawthorne was immensely proud of the role. So when he heard rumblings of a film adaptation of that play, he was determined to do whatever it took not to be shut out a second time. He needed to raise his profile in Hollywood. However, Hollywood liked their English as villains. The received pronunciation accent carries with it a sense of education, intelligence, sophistication, giving the character an additional sense of threat and satisfaction at their defeat. Joel Silver had a particular penchant for this. John Wood in Jumpin' Jack Flash, Alan Rickman in Die Hard, Joss Ackland in Lethal Weapon 2, Richard Grant in Hudson Hawk. So when Hawthorne's agent came back to him, it was playing a villain in a Joel Silver action movie. Hawthorne's initial reaction to the script was a load of old hokum, but found some of the wit promising and the characters quirky and out of the ordinary, so he decided to take the role. Hawthorne clearly regretted the decision, describing it as a miserable experience. He found Stallone intolerable as both a performer and presence. He liked to parade around with a large cigar jammed between his lips, cheerfully wisecracking until dragged forcibly away by the ever-indulgent Joel Silver. And in acting opposite Stallone, Hawthorne found the man's mumbling performance completely unintelligible to him. I used to keep my eyes on his lips. When they stopped moving, I knew it was my turn to speak. The script was changed out of recognition, removing much of what he'd found agreeable in his part. I counted the days to my return home to find there were rather more than I would have wished. I longed for the world I knew and understood. All I could do was keep reminding myself of the reason I was there. I wanted to play George III in the film. Ironically, he needn't have bothered with the role. Alan Bennett stated that he would not permit any adaptation unless Hawthorne played the lead and Nick Heitner directed. And speaking of directors, there was indeed a surprise in store for Silver's choice for Demolition Man. Among the films Joel Silver was working on was an adaptation of the comic Richie Rich. It was supposed to be directed by Marco Brambilla, whose work was usually commercials. Big commercials, but still commercials. David Fincher, who had just finished Alien 3 and would go on to direct the acclaimed Seven, suggested that with Richie Rich in limbo thanks to funding issues with the studio, perhaps Brambilla could direct Demolition Man? This had a mixed reaction. Some on the crew commented that it was like giving someone a driving lesson, then telling them to race the Indy 500. But others felt his broader vision, Brambilla is not just in film, but other kinds of performance art, it might be what was needed for a film presenting such a bizarre future. He had Stallone's confidence, though, and quickly sat down with Daniel Waters to tweak the script. Brambilla was able to bring in Alan Thompson for cinematography after he finished on Alien 3, and Bob Ringwood for costumes, based on his work on David Lynch's Dune. It was Joel Silver who brought in Stuart Baird to edit, as he had done with many of Silver's pictures. If Stuart Baird's name is familiar with you but you can't place from where, it's likely because his willingness to re-edit Lara Croft Tomb Raider and Mission Impossible 2 got him the director's chair for Star Trek Nemesis over LeVar Burton, and added insult to injury by calling him Laverne over and over. It's hard to say what having a director like Brambilla on such a big film did, but we know it went over time and over budget. Silver defended it, saying that it was because generally you film 2 pages a day, but when there's a line that says, "they fight," it can take days to film an eighth of a page. Still, this was leading to problems, as the 72-day shoot reached 110 and still wasn't finished, and members of the crew were leaving due to prior commitments for other projects. Stallone himself lost a week of filming due to an injury affecting the blood flow to his right arm. Bob Anderson, who actually as a child actor played the young George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, was now an executive at Warner Brothers and was sent to personally oversee the production to, quote, ride herd on Silver's expenditures. Indeed, it was said that if they were shooting for any other studio, they'd take drastic steps at this point, likely replacing Silver and even the director. But the president of Warner Brothers was actually a close personal friend of Silver's, and it's very hard to get a producer removed when the president of the studio literally threw him a massive birthday party just a month earlier. Now, it was more like Bob Anderson was there to ensure that things would move forward, not get stuck on anything. He wasn't there to jeopardize control of the film. Some advantages they did have in the budget was that the LA Department of Water and Power building was already supposed to be demolished, so they were able to arrange to do so themselves on camera, to fit the Demolition Man reputation, after all. Now, this was nothing new for Silver, whose Lethal Weapon 3 purchased an old city hall for $50,000 and dynamited it, purchased a vacant tract housing for $25,000 and set it on fire, and filmed the planned demolition of the Sereno Hotel for free. Part of the attraction of the film for Silver was that despite being sci-fi, Demolition Man didn't require many special effects. Just clean locations, dress sets, costumes, and you were about 90% of the way there. GM provided a fleet of 18 of their concept ultralights to portray futuristic cars, saving money there. The blimp scene at the beginning of the film, though, did have to be changed when it was realized it'd be impractical, so a helicopter was used instead. But they had to further change the planned stunt on the grounds that using a bungee jump from a helicopter is a bad plan, as it runs a serious risk of throwing the stuntman into the rotors. The film famously declares that Taco Bell alone survives the franchise wars, thus making all restaurants Taco Bell from now on. It wasn't the original choice, though. Seems neither McDonald's nor Burger King wanted to be associated with the R-rated film. Now, the R rating was something the studio wasn't a fan of, actually. They thought a PG-13 would be better, but there was something that necessitated it. Comedy. Specifically, the running gag that strong language was met with a buzzer and an automatic fine and citation. Even though the film wasn't particularly gruesome, the plethora of profanity meant they were going to get an R. This is likely the reason for the non-sequitur moment when a naked woman places a wrong number call to John Spartan's new apartment. The same way that, for instance, Spike Witwicky said shit in the animated Transformers film to get a PG rating instead of a G. Well, despite the fact that this was an R-rated movie, Taco Bell had no problem with that. After all, they were being presented as a winner. However, Taco Bell wasn't as well known outside of the US at this time. So for the overseas market, it was changed to Pizza Hut. Both were owned by PepsiCo at the time.
Please, I insist. I would like you to accompany me to Pizza Hut.
Brambilla actually had a number of expensive, successful commercials for them, so that might have made them more inclined to trust their brand wouldn't get smeared. One challenge was the role of Edgar Friendly, which went to Dennis Leary, who had never actually done acting before and was essentially coming in to play himself. He wrote his rants, which were then approved, but he needed coaching from Brambilla in order to feel comfortable with his performance. Another were problems with the action. The fight scene between Phoenix and the San Angeles police had to be rushed because of the expense of shooting a fight scene on location in the middle of the day. Another fight scene in the cryo chamber was expunged completely. This is why Jesse Ventura seems like a glorified extra in the movie. He appears, shoots someone, and just kind of vanishes. From what I've pieced together, it seems that the chance for him to tussle with Stallone was the reason that he agreed to do the small part. You can be physical with him and he won't cry about it afterwards. In the end, despite concerns from the studio, the film was finished after 112 days of shooting. On October 8, 1993, it opened number 1 at the box office, and despite some mixed reviews, still holds a fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It made $58 million domestically and another $100 million worldwide. All in all, it was a success, described as a smarter-than-average cop movie. All this 5 months after the release of Stallone's other film of the year, Cliffhanger, which was also a success. They'd done the job, salvaging Stallone's reputation after his recent failures and giving his career new life again. Oh, and the icing on top for Stallone was the other action comedy of the year that made less than his film domestically, less internationally, and was panned by critics. A little film by the name of Last Action Hero, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger.